Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. My name is Amri Johnson, your host. I hope you're well. Join me as we continue to deconstruct the shortcomings of traditional DEI strategies and co-create a vision for more transformative, human-centered approaches to inclusion. Myself and my esteemed guests will challenge the status quo, dive deep into the reactive, supplemental nature of many DEI initiatives. We'll explore how to reclaim the profound and transformational potential of inclusion as a catalyst for collective growth, empowerment, and organizational change. Season 2 of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast starts now. Greetings, folks. Amri here. I hope you're well. Since 2021, I've been waiting for what we call diversity, equity, and inclusion to be pressed into shifting toward a paradigm that is inherently more accessible to everyone, clearly prioritized in the organizational mind, and aligned with organizational purpose. Beyond social and political motivations, the pressure began in 2022. The reaction of those who felt they were winning with their approaches to social justice or anti-racism was predictable. They made the so-called other wrong for pushing back, following the same flawed playbook that has been used for short-term success for the previous 2 to 3 years before George Floyd's death. An unwillingness to be influenced by the so-called other is not inclusion, it's occlusion. The problem is that those successes were not necessarily for the organizations they were meant to help. They largely helped the consultants and internal employees hired to do the work. Many of those consultants, even some of the most popular on social media channels, have decided to transition away from racial equity work. In fact, one of the most popular in the UK shared that she had, and I paraphrase, done her part and left a lot of content and resources behind. She said there are plenty of others that can serve companies well. I do not doubt that the majority of people who entered into the fray amid the pandemic and the so-called global racial reckoning had noble intentions. They were passionate about their identity, and some became passionate about the identities they considered marginalized because of one's skin color. I seriously doubt that most of them considered the trade-offs involved in solving the problems they perceived themselves to be facing. In too many cases, I wonder if they clearly misunderstood the problem they were addressing. Undoubtedly, some of the people of a particular hue, caste, or social status worldwide have struggled to make their way into desired industries or onto the payrolls of well-known brands within those industries. There is a place in what we have been calling DEI to address social inequality. And this is the big and, despite their historical roots in the paradigms of social justice, civil rights, and the golden rule, genuinely effective approaches to inclusion and managing the tensions and complexity of similarities and differences, also known as diversity, have not been wholly steeped in those paradigms. In fact, the most valuable approaches have been about understanding the uniqueness each individual brings to the collective. Then, they must harness and build the skills and capabilities needed to effectively manage the multidimensional dynamics of organizational life and create the conditions for all stakeholders who are ever adapting to fulfill their missions consistently. Rather than expanding the paradigms toward effectiveness and value creation for people in organization, many practitioners and companies that they worked on behalf of resorted to the nearest bandwagon to jump on. I'm sure many of you have heard of bandwagons in the metaphorical sense. There was a point that they were not simply metaphors. The phrase originated in 19th century American politics. P.T. Barnum of circus fame, Barnum and Bailey circuses, and a politician himself, used bandwagons in his circus parades, literal horse-drawn wagons carrying musicians. Politicians began using similar wagons at rallies, and successful candidates would invite others to jump on the bandwagon, to join the winning side. By 1900, the phrase had evolved to its current metaphorical meaning of following popular trends. Many DEI approaches over the past several years, and anti-approaches, if I may, over the past 2 years, are bandwagon approaches. What do people do? They start ERGs, conduct anti-racism training, and call out microaggressions and gaslighting, anything that triggers negative emotions, particularly toward white guys. Or for the so-called anti-DEI crowd, the talk is about meritocracy, without knowing much about the origins or intentions of the person who coined the phrase. Linguistically redundant phrases like reverse discrimination get thrown around, and framing DEI as being about hiring less qualified racialized people. I get what many people in good faith are saying, yet, in a way, most are on a bandwagon too. The problem with both sides of these bandwagons is that they treat symptoms with the wrong remedy. They are iatrogenic for organizational culture and society. In medicine, iatrogenesis refers to the adverse effects created by medical treatment or healthcare interventions. The intentions, much like those of physicians and pharmaceutical companies when they make and prescribe new medicine, are novel. However, unlike medics and the molecules that researchers create to meet unmet medical needs, many DEI practitioners and their opponents do not rigorously chart adverse effects or trade-offs beyond self-gain. These approaches do not move people, organizations, or society toward consistently creating the conditions for everyone to thrive or for organizations to accumulate what I call and what researchers call thick value. Thick value is the dense and difficult to describe energy that flows in the best of times. It pays dividends for organizational cultures and society, especially during the most challenging ones. Thick value is generative. It allows people in their communities to go beyond resilience, to become stronger after stressors. Organizations must shift from a focus on symptoms related to difference and similarity or diversity. They need to understand and deeply reconstruct the underlying systems that create current results. Those who are involved deeply in complexity theory might argue that organizations do not have problems per se. They have patterns that produce undesirable outcomes. Making sense of these patterns and discovering instances where results align with desired outcomes reflects the principles and skills and capabilities that my partners and I teach and learn with clients through the Emergent Inclusion System. The Emergent Inclusion System is a principle-centered framework for making inclusion normative in organizational life. As I described in my book, Reconstructing Inclusion, I use the word inclusion to reference any action that creates the conditions for people to thrive and for organizational cultures to be generative. The Emergent Inclusion Framework aims to help individuals and organizations develop capabilities that enhance their capacity for anti-fragility, bouncing higher and becoming stronger after facing the difficulties, tensions, and complexity that naturally emerge with diversity in all human communities. Professor Scott E. Page, a distinguished professor of complexity at the University of Michigan, discusses this in his book that I highly recommend, Diversity and Complexity. This year on the Reconstructing Inclusion Substack and on our podcast, we will explore the principles, elements, and capabilities inherent in our Emergent Inclusion System. I'll share more about the Emergent Inclusion System framework along with our guests, and we'll provide commentary and complementary insights that you can use to begin crafting your own shift from the paradigms that brought us to today toward a future where inclusion skills and capabilities are unambiguously prioritized in your culture. We will examine what beliefs create the conditions for an approach to inclusion, whether you call it DEI, DEIB, IDEA, JEDI, any of the other acronyms you use. We want to create an approach that's accessible to everyone, actionable in everyday working situations, and aligned with the mission in a way that everyone gets its value. The Emergent Inclusion Framework allows you to analyze what beliefs create an approach designed to go beyond theory, tailored to your context. As the Center for Creative Leadership says, you can't change behaviors without changing beliefs. I would add that you cannot change beliefs without what I call relational fitness, a sort of post-it-like glue amongst your people that helps you optimize the way you do things around here. We will ask and respond to questions such as, if a firm practices inclusion in the most instrumental and effective way, what skills and capabilities are needed to make it sustainable? How do you acculturate and engage employees to go beyond resilience? That is, to foster anti-fragility in people and organizations to bounce higher after difficult periods. How can your organization be future fit amidst the incessant shifts emerging faster than any individual can comprehend? How do you guide people toward more excellent relational fitness and take ownership of the organizational culture within and beyond their designated roles? What does it take to surface signals and recognize patterns, both the adverse and the advantageous, in a way that allows for your strategy to emerge with people at all levels and for everyone to know that their contributions and insights matter? In what ways are principles like caring, interdependence, openness, intellectual honesty, and trust being fostered? And much more. We also wanted to delve into the why affirmatively and consistently you should prioritize this work beyond the rhetoric in the social sphere. Your investments toward people and culture must be tracked, minded, and managed to ensure your organization's most influential actors unmistakably own the narrative, not just when it makes those influential folks look good, but having them own it when things are off the mark, times where it requires deep prioritization and intention. If you want to build trust, that is a great place to start. Communicate your wins and your losses, things working and not, the need for shifts and the needs to double down. Why is this critical now more than ever? At the beginning of this message, I shared that the pressure that is coming, mainly from the US and the so-called anti-DEI bandwagon, is a prime opportunity to shift approaches to creating inclusive organizational cultures that are structured for now and for long-term sustainability. I also wrote about this in Reconstructing Inclusion, and the need for the shift has never been greater or more opportune. As tennis great Billie Jean King and NBA championship coach Doc Rivers say, pressure is a privilege. Let's take that privilege in front of us and create the extraordinary in this space of inclusion and diversity, being mindful of the needs of everyone, especially those needing the most help from all backgrounds and identities. So, for our contribution to creating the extraordinary, this year we will share new tools and resources, including the Emergent Inclusion Framework, which will be launched in the form of a masterclass called Emergent Inclusion Foundations, as well as a community tentatively named Emergent Inclusion Immersion. Both of these initiatives are for individuals and organizations. We also invite you to take our Systemic Inclusion Survey. The basic version is gratis, it's free. The Systemic Inclusion Survey is an organization design-oriented diagnostic that allows you to assess how well your organizational systems reflect inclusive ways of operating. Before I close, I would be remiss not to thank you, all of our listeners and subscribers, to Reconstructing Inclusion, our podcast and our Substack, as well as the Inclusion Wins and my personal LinkedIn channels. Thank you for your listening, watching, and engagement throughout 2024. Lastly, as a postscript, around the Lunar New Year, I will be looking for fathers who had children like me when they were over the age of 40. If you know anyone around the world open to sharing their story, please let me know. We can adjust to all languages. More to come at the end of January. I hope this was helpful. Make it a great day. Make it a great 2025. Peace. If you are committed or simply a little bit curious about how to make DEI accessible to everyone, actionable, that is, unambiguously prioritized, and sustainable, aligned with personal and organizational purpose, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day. Peace.